Hey y'all, you're listening to Word on the Street, an OML and RRC podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Word on the Street. I am Kyara, and I'll be your host for today, and we're going to talk about queer mental health. But before we do that, I'm going to let the rest of the people on the call with me introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Grace Urbanato. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the logistics coordinator for the violence prevention educators on campus.
Hey y'all, my name is Lucia Hodges. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the PR coordinator for the Wellness Center, as well as their eating disorder specialist.
Hi, I'm Clarise Ballesteros. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm one of the therapists in residence. And I also facilitate SCQ at SCU, which is an LGBTQ plus affirming group on campus.
Hey y'all, I'm Colleen. I'm a sophomore double majoring in music and diplomacy and violence prevention. I'm a they/themer, and I'm co-president of the Violence Prevention Educators.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you all here today. And like I said, we're going to be talking about queer mental health. I think to get the ball rolling is kind of just address just like what is queer mental health and like how can that like be seen on campus. So I can start. For me, what queer mental health is just dealing with mental health as a queer person. I feel is a little bit different than how it would be as a straight person dealing with mental health, because you, especially being at a predominantly white institution, it's the feeling of that you're kind of different from everybody. So it's just this feeling of like sort of being an outsider and not knowing like who specifically you can rely on for support, because the school never really like directly says, oh, this is where you have to like really search for like queer mental health here on campus, in my opinion. It's not really directly stated like, oh, here it is. So yeah, if anyone else would like to share their like take on queer mental health and how they view it, that would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've found that I'm pretty comfortable using the Cowell Center resources. I've taken advantage of them in the past, but it was absolutely something that I had to, realize was a safe resource for me first. And so, again, they don't really advertise that there are queer mental health resources. So it was something that I felt like I had to figure out first before I knew that it wasn't really presented overtly as something that was going to be a safe space for LGBTQ identifying people. So eventually I got to the point where I was able to use those resources and I found them very helpful, but I agree that they really weren't presented that way at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that being at a very heteronormative institution, it's definitely a challenge trying to balance mental health and my queer identity, and also like just honestly like being queer at the school is really hard sometimes. And I think that like the Wellness Center is trying to incorporate LGBTQ plus mental health resources into our resources. It's not something that we used to do in the past. And so I think we have a task force ran by Grace Evans for specifically targeting marginalized communities and their mental health. And so she's doing a lot of work with LGBTQ plus mental health as well. And I'm working with that as well.
That's really nice. No, you can
go. Yeah, I would say similarly for VPE. Yeah, I've tried throughout the year to sort of like integrate like LGBTQIA plus like issues like into our programming. And that's including not only like trainings for my execs, but also for the presentations that my learning and development team has been giving to the fraternities.
I'm not a student, but when I think about queer mental health in general, I first think about like mental health is a human experience, but then I think we have to understand like minority stress to take into account like how having any marginalized identity or then having multiple marginalized identities, right, can then compound minority stress, right? So minority stress is something that is chronic, which means it happens throughout the lifespan. It's socially created, which means it's society's problem, therefore it's society's responsibility to fix it instead of the individual. And minority stress affects not just our mental health, but also our physical health. And so I think when we think about queer mental health, we have to think about all of that and why it is more than just the human experience.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true, especially as you were saying, like it being like marginalized mental health. That's definitely where like intersectionality comes into play. There's so many things that make up a person. And it all can like feel like somewhat of a weight on your shoulders, especially being at a predominantly white institution, like having all these feelings of like it just seems like you're an outsider because you don't see a lot of people who look like you, or you feel they don't like experience the same things you experience. But thankfully we do have the MCC, so people are able to find like little communities that they can like feel supported. I'm glad QPACA was formed because that feels like it's hitting on like a specific marginalized group of queer people of color, and I feel like that's a good way to find like support within the community. Speaking of being like a queer just being queer students on campus, like what do you think like the stigma is like behind like because like it's one thing having to be a queer, but like as a college student we're already burdened with like a lot of things like class, work, any outside commitments, like all of that can be very like heavy. And I'm just curious what you all think about like how can one like figure out like a balance between like maintaining their own lives while being a college student who's queer.
Yeah. I mean, I think for starters is using the resources that our school has, and they're limited, but coming to the Wellness Center and like talking to someone who has similar experiences. For myself, I incorporate different parts, like aspects of wellness in my day, every day, from journaling to just taking like a nice outdoor breather. But when intertwined with my queerness, I have noticed that I feel like almost uncomfortable sometimes in my sexuality on campus, and feel like sometimes people are staring maybe, and like no, like I'm always like, oh my god, they know, and I'm like, oh gosh, and I'm very open and I'm very out, but some like I have dealt with a lot of homophobia, and so I'm still trying to navigate that myself, and trying to be so open and out with my sexual identity and feeling pride in that, while in that itself helps with my mental health, feeling really like accepting myself. I'm from Georgia, deep South, very small town. And so I grew up with a lot of internalized homophobia, didn't get to come out until college. And so I think that's still a working process for me, totally, like, but being so open and out really helps with me in my mental health.
Right. And I feel like, oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead, Colleen. All right. I feel like I haven't personally experienced overt homophobia here, but I think the predominant mindset is kind of straight until proven otherwise at SCU. So it's just kind of assumed that you are heteronormative, which can be damaging in a different way from, facing overt homophobia, because in one way it's a safe thing for people to assume that you're straight, because it lessens the chances that you are going to receive homophobic backlash. But at the same time, it's really disheartening to not really be identified as who you are, and people automatically assume that you're not your sexual identity without actually stopping to ask. So That's definitely the toughest thing I've found here. But I think finding a group of people who I found safe expressing my identity to and knowing that those people will always support me has been very helpful.
Yeah, I kind of have like the opposite experience almost because like I'm like very mask and I feel like there aren't a lot of people like me like on campus. But one thing that has helped me out a lot like with my mental health is um yeah, just like making music. Like I mentioned that I'm a music major, so I make like electronic and rock music and I like writing songs about experiences that like I've had that like I can't find anywhere else. So like I'm often really frustrated by like I don't know, like being like the only not the only mask person, but like probably one of the only mask people on campus. So I sort of like vent about those frustrations through music and that helps a lot.
Yeah, similarly, I'm an artist and I do the same thing kind of putting all my, that's another huge tactic of mine for mental health.
On to Grace's point about how like you're straight until proven otherwise, I feel like again, like I have a very like different and almost opposite experience from that. Like for example, people will assume that because I'm masked, like I have like more experience or whatever. Yeah, like most recently, like one of my friends I was talking to was like, oh, like you're such like a self-assured lesbian. Like I would have thought that like you'd like been with like more girls. And I was like, what? So yeah, that's yeah, two sides of a spectrum.
Yeah, I think you all highlight the fact that there really isn't a one size fit all, and there really isn't one clear common experience. So for us to say, like, here's the solution for everyone, here's the resource for everyone, here's the tip, here's the trick, that would be kind of like, I don't know, our whole point is like expanding everyone's conceptions of identities and human beings, right? So why should we subscribe to categories or boxes of ways to take care of ourselves? So that being said, I think like that's a beautiful part of it, but that's also super challenging, right? Is like what works for one does not work for all. But what I think is so cool about what each of you expressed is like you're putting in the work to figure out what works for each of you. And you're also acknowledging the things that aren't working and doing what you can to change them so that other people have more choices. Like that's so important.
Yeah, I think to a point Lucia was making was she had mentioned that like she was out and proud, and I love that. I'm also very out and proud. But it sometimes feel like I don't see a lot of people also out and proud, and that's completely understandable. So that makes it a little bit hard to really know like who among us can I go to for support, who can I rely on, because I'm just it's hard because I don't want to assume who's queer, but it's hard because like not everyone's as like out and proud about it, and it's that's okay. Like come out on your own terms. It is your decision to make. So it's just hard to like sometimes find community because we're all scattered on this campus. So it's like, where do I like look, because there's not like a singular place for us to go and feel and like just be ourselves essentially. And kind of to that, I just want to talk a little bit about like the difficulty like reaching out to others and just resources here on campus. Like I was saying, like it's especially coming in during my first year, it was hard to really navigate the campus and really understand like what can help me specifically as someone who's queer, as someone who as a BIPOC person. Like I was saying earlier, nothing was really advertised specifically for the identities that I had, so it was a little bit difficult finding like that community I'm just wondering if anyone else had that difficulty or has seen like that happen on campus.
Totally. I think that I kind of automatically assume that if I'm seeking out mental health support, that they're not going to understand my queerness or like my queer experience, because that plays a huge role into my mental health. And I mean, it's something I go to therapy every week, and it's something I talk a lot about. So and so I just kind of automatically assume, and I think that's really hard, because I really want the person that I'm talking about my queer experience with also kind of knows what, like, understands it. And I think there's like a lack of that here. And so seeking out help is super difficult for me personally, because I just don't want to talk about my queer experience with someone who's going to be like, oh, what? So I really like need someone to really be able to relate and help me through that. Who yeah.
I think like adding on to that point, I just wanted to like drop a resource. The Trevor Project is dedicated to ending LGBTQ suicide globally. They have a hotline. They're a really wonderful resource, at least in my experience. And I think that like a lot of the people who like volunteer like to be like advocates on the hotline like are also part of the community, so that has given me some solace from time to time.
Yeah, I think also I think my internalized homophobia also kind of restricts me from seeking out help, because I'm always fearful that someone's going to say something or like be judgmental. I sometimes, like, especially with adults, and I think this is totally just related to how I grew up, but especially with adults, I get really fearful of coming out to them. So seeking out help and having that fear, I don't, yeah, that's just so deeply instilled in me. So I think it's hard to navigate around that.
Yeah, I just want to recognize the fact that, right, you both, or you all, are kind of talking about like these risks that you had to take to learn about these resources, to then take advantage of these resources, and when they're not necessarily super visible, right? Because we think of it on the other side as like, yes, in CAPS, in the counseling center, we're working on like therapists kind of showing more of their personal identities. And also that's tricky because then you're asking individuals to also choose to come out in the workplace, right? So there could be a whole conversation about that, right? Like, how do we signal to students and potential clients that we have those identities, that we can provide those affirming spaces, while also acknowledging like the human beings doing that work and their safety and their journey and their identity, right, and self-expression. And so I know I'm not the one to be asking questions, but I would love to hear the things that you all like. How do you navigate finding those like signals of affirming places on campus, or just like affirming human beings as you're navigating different spaces?
I know when I first sought mental health resources from the Cowell Center, after the initial triage appointment, I went and looked up some of the therapists that they had available and looked specifically for the therapists and psychiatrists who had in their bios that they were LGBTQ supporting, interested in working with that community. So even if they weren't exactly part of the community, at least I knew that they were going to be an accepting resource for me. But again, it's very hard because you're saying it's a whole other obstacle to navigate coming out in the workplace. So it's hard to, find someone who is a mental health provider but is also out. I have not experienced a therapist in the past who is part of the LGBTQ community. I found people who are very accepting of it, but I do absolutely think there's a difference between the help you can get from somebody who wants to help with your situation and the help you can get from somebody who has experienced it themselves.
Yeah, I think my girlfriend had to pretty much just jump right on into her sexuality. She did not understand that she was queer until we started dating, and she struggled significantly with that and just navigating her newfound sexuality and having to come out to her friends who she was fearful would not be accepting. And she also sought out help from CAPS and did the same thing of looking for LGBTQ plus affirming care from those therapists. And she told me that she had a great experience and that it was very helpful.
I think like from my personal experience, like I just got really lucky because my therapist also happens to be a lesbian and she also happens to be masked. So like, yeah, that's helpful because I think that no matter how much training or education you have, that will never equate like the actual like lived experience of like specific identities. So again, I just got lucky with that, but also I know like Kim Shu of the RRC Center like is very like LGBTQ like support. I'm sorry, she's a very big supporter of the LGBTQ community. So she's a very valuable resource as well. And also, I'm just like name dropping now, but I like helped interview like some of the candidates who were going to be or who would have been like hired for like the CAPS. And one of them, Daniel Reed, is also a wonderful like LGBTQ expert. I'm cautious about saying the word expert, but take that with a grain of salt. Yeah.
Yeah, you all are saying like really good points. I like when I was first like figuring out my identities, it was hard to like decide whether or not who felt comfortable to come out to because it was just, I don't want to say it was necessarily internalized homophobia, but just I think as a society we're instilled with thinking that, oh, if we were to come out to somebody, they're just immediately gonna just be indifferent about it or just get like upset about it for no good reason. And it definitely took some time and definitely took being surrounded by the right people to make me feel more comfortable about my identity and being more willing to share it to people, especially people I was close to. Something else I would like to talk about is kind of going back to being like a queer college student. And like I don't know if it's just me, but to me it seems that we have a somewhat of a great more deal of stress as being a college student. There's just a lot to on our plate besides just like being a college student. I'm just curious about what's everyone's thoughts on that. Like, do you think queer students like have more stress on their plate, or what do you think's going on?
Totally. I mean, I think having dealt with blatant homophobia, both directed at me and my girlfriend here at Santa Clara, it puts that's obviously very detrimental to your mental health. And I have an anxiety disorder, and so I think that there's just challenges around being a queer college student that other people do not have to experience. And I think that it definitely has impacted my studies, and I think it's impacted several aspects of my wellness, just because of those added stressors. And I keep bringing up my internalized homophobia too, but that's also had a really big toll on my mental health. And that's just something that my hetero cis friends don't deal with. And so that definitely adds a lot to my plate.
Yeah, I was going to add on to that because like well our community is like very, very diverse, like the LGBTQ community, and there are many different ways to like experience like being a part of that community. And so for example, I was going to say like I was just going to comment on like the nuances of like certain struggles like that relate to certain identities. Like for example, I have a lot of friends who are queer and femme, and like they struggle with like not like being gay enough because like they have boyfriends or what have you. And on the opposite side of the spectrum, like someone like me, like I don't know, I'll get like called like gay as an insult or like the D slur. So it's just like there are multiple different struggles. And also I want to highlight like the trans and non-binary communities, which I'm also a part of, like also experience like disproportionate rates of stress. Um, yeah, just because like as of April like 2023, like there have been at least like around 420 like anti-LGBTQ bills introduced to state legislatures. So I think that the like yeah, like the political climate is also a very big factor in your mental health.
Yeah, I mean, not only are you all living in like the SCU paradise, whatever bubble, and all of the trials and tribulations that come with that, and the microaggressions and all of that business, right? But then in the context of like the state, the county, the world, the country, right? And all these things that are happening. And those are just layers, right? It's just like, I really appreciate, Colleen, that you brought up some identities and voices that aren't in the room today, because their experience here at SCU is also very different than maybe the people that are gathered here right now, right? Like transitioning in college, transitioning, being BIPOC in college, right? Like there's all these layers of where you see this extra mental health just challenge because of the weight of navigating all those layers. And you don't get to like separate anything out and be like, okay, right now I'm just going to stress out about my classes. And oh, right now I'm just going to stress out about like my ethnic identity or my queer identity. No, it's like always being thrown at you. It's kind of like pulling a string, right? Of like a sweater that unravels. It's all connected. And so I think it's really tricky to figure out how to hold all of that. But I think you all kind of earlier mentioned ways that each of you navigate how you carry that additional stress.
Mhm. Yeah, and coming from my work with eating disorders, queer people are significantly more likely to develop an eating disorder than cis hetero people. And transgender people, 15% of trans people develop eating disorders in their lifetime. So it's clear that there's a correlation between that and struggling with your identity, and also having those added mental health issues. And I was in treatment for 2 years for my eating disorder, and I'm not kidding. I think almost 90% of the patients I met were queer. So it's very telling of like, that's clearly like was an added stressor that definitely was correlated to my sexuality.
I just wanted to quickly comment on like the financial stress that sometimes comes along with being a part of the LGBTQ community. Like again, as I've mentioned, like I'm trans mask. So yeah, just like getting new clothes, getting like body wash that doesn't smell like flowers, like all that sort of stuff. Like it sounds small, but it does add up cost wise. And that can be a burden to the LGBTQ community. And as a whole, I don't think we have a ton of like economic leverage, at least in the United States. So I would say that yeah, that's just also a big issue.
Yeah, to that point and to a point you had made earlier about like being like not looking gay enough, something that I kind of stress about practically almost daily, unfortunately, is like whether I'm like being perceived as female, because I identify as non-binary, but sometimes I worry like people assume that I'm female, so I'm sometimes worrying about like how am I dressed, like are people gonna think I'm dressed too girly, because and unfortunately that's what my closet is full of. It's full of like a bunch of the, and clothes should not have gender, but like it's hard to like separate clothes and gender. So it's just a lot of my clothes feel very gendered and feel very feminine, and I can't afford to like redo my whole closet, so I'm left with having to work with what I got and trying to figure out like what can I do to this to make it seem less feminine. What can I do to this to make it just feel more like me? What can I like wear to feel comfortable in and not like having to essentially please other people?
Totally. When I like literally within a week of coming out to my friends, I went to the store and was like, I have to buy more like lesbian presenting clothing. And luckily I'm so feminine. I'm just like the most, like when I was little, like I only wanted to wear dresses. I'm so feminine. And I luckily it was able to kind of, I just felt that was necessary. I was like, to be validated in my sexuality, I need to dress a certain way. And luckily I've come to accept myself a little bit more and still wear my dresses. And hope that people still respect my sexuality, and don't presume that I'm assume that I'm straight.
I was going to say this conversation reminds me a lot of, and Grace, you might recall, the whole like sweatshirt debacle that was going on in VPE. For context. In the fall and winter quarters, members on my executive board presented ideas for like VPE merchandise that were like extremely feminine and like very like pink, and one of them had like a rather objectifying design of like a nude female figure on them. And it felt rather isolating to be one of the only voices in the room who was saying, hey, this doesn't apply to everyone. And this can be like alienating to certain communities. So yeah, I would say that like clothes and presentation, like, yeah, can definitely be a big factor of stress. And like, I also do want to stress that like there's nothing wrong with like femininity, of course. I'm just saying like it doesn't apply to everyone. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And little assumptions like that definitely add up as far as affecting your mental health, especially when you've got so many other concerns going on. Something like that can be very triggering, even if it was not meant to be malicious. I'm sure there were no bad intentions, but people just don't really, I don't know, they don't think about it from the LGBTQ perspective if they're not part of the community always.
People don't think about it, right? I think that's a big underlying theme here, is the fact of like, I mean, Colleen saying like, right, that the queer community doesn't have that financial like power, right? And then before, you all were saying of like people make assumptions about your identities because the queer community doesn't have the social power on campus, right? It's like all these assumptions. The fact that people can get away with saying like, I have made it to adulthood and I've never had to think about the queer experience, that is a huge impact on mental health, right? Just knowing that the world wasn't created for you or by you, knowing that the majority of spaces that you're going to go in was not created for you or by you, which is why it was such a great point earlier saying like the existence of all these new groups on campus, right? Like Cubaka, or like even the thrift that like the RRC has been doing, like collecting clothes and like free clothes for people, right? Like creating these spaces that are created for you, by you. That's so important.
And it's also important that they, just the school in general, like show support in other ways to the LGBTQ plus community. Like for one, something that I'm always thinking about because there's not a lot of is gender neutral restrooms. I feel like a lot of buildings don't even have at least one gender neutral bathroom in them, which is unfortunate. Or if they do have one, it's like in some secluded, isolated part of the building, like in Benson, for example. There is thankfully, I believe, one, maybe two, but it's like all the way by like Williman. So, and that's like basically hidden off because like who's gonna like have to go walk there to go use the restroom? It's honestly crazy to me how very little they do, because like having a restroom is essential, and the fact that they only have like very few gender neutral restrooms bothers me very much, because not a lot of people feel comfortable using a gender specific restroom.
Absolutely. I've been doing a little bit of mapping of the school's bathrooms in general for a different reason. We're looking at like the availability of lactation spaces and changing spaces for parents. But a big thing that we found is that there's not a lot of bathrooms accessible to the public. We have a lot of people a lot of very diverse people who come on this campus every day, and there is one marked public bathroom, and it is not gender neutral. It's a male bathroom and a female bathroom. So if it's already hard for us as students and staff here to find bathrooms, it's even harder for the thousands and thousands of people that visit this campus every year, that go to church and the mission, to have to find a space on a campus they don't know where they feel safe just using the bathroom. They're not there. They don't exist here.
It's a safety issue, right? I mean, students will report not going to the bathroom for hours on end, not changing certain hygiene products for hours on end because there isn't a bathroom, right? And that causes like physical health impact, mental health impact, right? Like the Trevor Project, which Colleen mentioned earlier, their 2023 national survey on mental health and LGBTQ plus youth. So that's like ages 13 to like 26 or something. They found that schools just providing gender neutral bathrooms, if you go to a school that provides a gender neutral bathroom, the percentage of those respondents were significantly less likely to think about ending their own lives. It's a serious issue, right? It's not about comfort. It is about safety. And so I really appreciate that you bring that up, right?
Hi everyone, this is Anissa. A little break from the conversation to let you in on some things that are going to be going on this week. First thing that we have, SIE Sean is hosting Thursday Swag and Siesta. That's going to be happening every Thursday from 12 to 1 p.m. at the OML house every Thursday to hang out, take a nap before your next class, and grab something you like. Everything is free, anything that you want from the Office for Multicultural Learning. That's at the OML house at 832 Market Street across from SWIG. Next up, we have a collaboration from the RRC and the Wellness Center, and they're going to be putting on an ice cream social. That's going to be happening Thursday, June 1st at 5 p.m. at the Wellness Center. That is at 852 Market Street across from SWIG. We hope to see you there. After that, we have another Queer Craft Corner, and actually the last Queer Craft Corner of the quarter. At this Queer Craft Corner, we're going to be making crochet pride pillows. That's going to be happening Friday, June 2nd from 2 to 4 p.m. at the Rainbow Resource Center in Lower Benson 11 near the cellar. Once again, we hope to see you there. It's the last one that we're going to be doing this quarter and the last one that I'm going to be a part of. So I would love to see all your faces before I head out. SCU Wellness Center and the RRC are going to be doing a suicide prevention walk. It is called When the Rainbow is Enough, a walk for suicide prevention. That's going to be going on June 3rd from 9:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Definitely go out, be a proud supporter, do what you can, and then after you go and join the walk, you can then go to Rainbow Prom, which is also going to be happening Saturday, June 3rd from 7 to 9 p.m. at the Ignatian Lawn behind Kenna. If you would like to RSVP for it, I will be leaving a link in the description down below. Also, we're still taking donations, y'all. We still want your clothing. We still want your accessories. We want shoes. We want jewelry. We want unused makeup if you've got it. Anything that you can bring by to donate and have for our next event, you can be doing that, taking that stuff to the RC on Tuesdays and Wednesdays from 1:30 to 5:30 p.m. And all of that is going to be going towards our last thrift tea event of the year. This is going to be going on Sunday, June 4th from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. in the Williman Room. Once again, it's a place where you can come in, get some free clothing, get some free accessories, get some free resources. It's a really great event. Even if you're not a part of the trans community, just come and get some clothes, get some stuff that you're going to love forever, because we have so many great items. And it's just a really fun event. So we really hope to see you there. And now let's go ahead and get back into the conversation.
I think yeah, just sort of adding on to that and like sort of like highlighting more of the nuances of this situation. Like from my personal experience, something that I have struggled with was that like I don't want to seem like I'm like a threat or something if I use the women's bathroom, even though that is like what I was assigned at birth. However, I've always been cautious about using the men's restroom because I don't, trigger warning for like assault, but like I don't want to get like raped there and I don't want to get like found out. So yeah, there are a lot of different like power dynamics that are at play when considering like yeah, just like what bathroom to use, which shouldn't be as big of an issue as it is.
Yeah, definitely. Something else I think is worth talking about is just like when it comes to like support, it also feels like the school doesn't necessarily show much support to the various LGBTQ plus communities we do have on campus. The Rainbow's resource being one in particular. Our current location isn't necessarily the best because it doesn't feel visible and it doesn't feel like we're visible to the larger queer community here on campus. It's underneath Benson. You can miss it if you're not looking at it. It's on the way to the cellar. Yeah, and it feels I feel like a lot of people think it's more of an office space instead of like a space for queer people just to have. And it's just like it looks like an office, and we don't want it to be an office. It's meant to serve as a space for all to either come to do homework, hang out, maybe sleep on the couch, because we do have a couch and it has a lovely crochet blanket on it. And yeah.
I definitely appreciate what you're saying about how there's a lack of visibility of resources on campus. However, I wanted to like introduce an initiative that I'm working on for VPE, which is and it should be, I'm hoping to have it launched in the fall, but so currently the university, the administration doesn't collect statistics on the LGBTQ community here at Santa Clara, which is like obviously quite detrimental to like our collective like mental but also physical health. So as we were talking about the like physical implications of like not going to the bathroom, things like that. Sorry, as I was saying, there's no data on us and therefore it's like we don't exist. So one initiative that I'm working on is a data collection survey, which would be confidential and would request students to disclose like race, sexuality, gender identity, and major so that we can more precisely address the needs of our communities. And also as a side note, there's been a lot of I know like for the MENA group, like the Middle Eastern North African Student Organization on campus has been struggling to get the administration to recognize them. So I've partnered with them in a sense with Sarah Al-Qada to have like Middle Eastern North African like be an option like for the race section of the survey. And I would also have the option for you to like write in your own like race or ethnicity and write in your own gender identity. So there's like room for creativity and like expression in that sense. But yeah.
Sorry, I know I'm not the one supposed to be asking questions, but both Kyara and Colleen, I'm curious what y'all do around sexual assault against queer individuals, because I've experienced it myself, and there's so much stigma being like, oh, I was assaulted by a girl, or and so like what is the VPEs doing on that matter? And then again, like how does our RRC support that?
So firstly, for the violence prevention educators, I've designed trainings and exercises for my execs that encourage them to think critically about cisgender and heterosexual privilege, which of course informs our work. Along with that, I'm a very big proponent of the Trevor Project. I really encourage people to use it whether or not they're part of the community, as it is a very valuable resource. And I do recommend that, and I do ask like in a non-judgmental way to like people who come into the wellness center who might be consulting with Brave Ness or survivor advocate about sexual assault. I'll ask them if they're interested in like receiving any LGBTQ resources. And just like giving people that option can give them a sense of like feeling seen and feeling heard that I think is very valuable. And in addition to that, like the primary project that I've been working on throughout the year is this data collection survey, which although it might sound like more abstract in theory and it might not sound like it directly relates to like sexual assault prevention within the LGBTQ community, it definitely does, because again, without statistics, like we don't have numbers that can inform like anti-violent operations on campus.
And as for the Rainbow Resource Center, there isn't, to my knowledge, there isn't any like direct protocol intact for how we handle a situation like that. But as student inclusion educators, we are open to like listening to the student, hearing them out. And even though we don't have any like power to do specifically anything, I know there are other places we can reach out to, like the Title IX, maybe even like going to the wellness center and talking with other VPEs on like how can we help, because they're like I said, I don't know if there's any like thing in like progress for us to do as students, but I'm sure we can, and we are willing to like find other ways to help students here on campus, even if we don't like immediately know what to do.
Yeah, and for y'all and whoever's listening, also knowing that Brave Ness is an incredible resource, who is very LGBTQ plus affirming, and definitely recommend her work if you're seeking that.
And also I wanted to mention that along with Brave Ness, the Wellness Center, it's 852 Market Street across from SWIG. We're open every day, Monday through Friday from 10 to 5, and there's always either myself or like another VPE or a peer health educator who's present at the front desk. And I can say that the four of us who man the front desk like have received like some training. Obviously we're not like therapists, but we can provide like non-therapeutic counseling as needed, I suppose. I use the word counseling with caution because, again, I'm not a therapist, but like if you need support, if you just need someone to talk to, we're here.
I think when navigating topics that could fall under Title IX, the most important thing is like letting each person know the rules of like reporting on campus, because right, like it's their story, right? And some people on campus, the majority of people on campus that are employed by the university, if they hear that story, they are obligated to report that story. And that can be really damaging if that person is not ready for that and they're not choosing that, right? Like consent, right? That's what we're talking about here. And so it's so important that we are very clear and like do our part to making sure like every student knows the confidential resources on campus is Bree and the Wellness Center, and then the therapists on campus through CAPS. That is it. Everyone else, your professor, your CF, right? Certain students who are employed by the university, staff members of the university, they have Title IX reporting obligations, right? And they can be such a great resource, right? And I've been thinking about the Title IX office while we've been talking about this, right? Of like getting their voice in here, or at least getting them to hear a conversation today about thinking about, you know, sexual assault in terms of like broadening our idea from this like, yeah, heteronormative type idea. But yeah, I just always want to make sure students know like who you can share the story with, and that other person, you remain in control of your story, right? Versus who you share your story with. And unfortunately, then other people can now kind of share that story, right? Or decide kind of where that story goes.
I think along with that, I just wanted to add that of course the violence prevention educators, if Grace hasn't introduced this before, my apologies, and my apologies for me not introducing it, but so we're a relationship violence prevention student organization on campus, and we work to educate like the broader campus community about relationship violence prevention, and we teach people how to actively intervene in instances of violence. We also support survivors, so we're a resource. And then along with that, I did want to add that regarding Title IX, there's no obligation to like, for example, like pursue like, how do you call it, like legal action against your perpetrator. Title IX is like a very, I would say, like broad bureau, and it can provide like supportive resources, and going to Title IX doesn't necessarily mean that like you've signed up to like take legal action.
Right. Like
Absolutely.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, sorry. I did want to clarify, right? That's why I was using the word story, right? There's a difference between sharing your story and deciding where your story goes. But just because your story may need to be shared in certain settings does not mean your choice of the action is taken away, right? And the Title IX office is a great resource for navigating what your options for actions are.
Right. And unlike Title IX needs to be, or is required to be, a neutral resource. Our whole thing at the Wellness Center is that we are survivor advocates and survivor supporters. So we are here specifically to help survivors with whatever resources they feel comfortable accessing. If that is Title IX, then we're there to help with navigating Title IX. But if that's not Title IX, then we have a whole list of other resources and ways that we can support survivors without having to report it to our legal system here, our office here, that just focuses on you. You know, that's really what we're here to do, support you through whatever you choose and feel comfortable doing.
I love that we're talking about all these different doors, right? All these doors that are available to students to walk through, because they can walk through the Wellness Center's door and find that support that's tailored just for them. They could come to the counseling center and find that support tailored just for them, get connected to similar or different resources, right? And the Title IX office is yet another door, right? The Rainbow Resource Center is a door as well, in the fact that, like, right, Brunel and then all the students that work there are so tapped into all these resources. And if they don't know the answer, they are so good at finding it, right? Yeah. And so that's what's really cool, is like all these doors that are being opened to students.
Yes, I'm really glad that we were able to address this in particular, just to help people feel that they're not alone. It may not seem like it at first, but there are resources here on campus for you. And if you come to like any one of us, we are willing to help you as best as we can, because we want you to be able to feel safe and comfortable on this campus. You chose to come here. We want you to ensure that you can feel like this is a place you can enjoy for the next 4 or however many years you have left here. The last thing I will love to touch on is some of you briefly did mention earlier, just like ways to like deal and cope with like mental health. If you feel comfortable like just sharing more like how you found that, that'd be really nice.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to that. And I've always loved art, and it's always been a huge part of my life. But I think when I went to treatment, I had all this free time that I got to do a lot of art, and I started doing these sketches that really showed how I was feeling, and how stuck I was feeling. And that was like kind of the first time I started doing my art focused around myself and my emotions and my mental health. And then I've developed that more into a lot of my art's political and about political issues. But really that, I mean, spending time in the art studio and just like totally shutting off my mind and creating things has been just life-changing in my recovery experience. And I always encourage people, even if they're not good at art or they don't think they're good at art, to take that on and just sketch and just make random shit and like just do whatever you want with art, because it's so calming, and it can be really it's a great way for me to manage my mental health.
Yeah, I think adding on to that, I mentioned previously that I make like electronic and rock music. I've found that like sort of like developing like my own personal aesthetic that like speaks to my experience as a queer person and as a non-binary person has been really helpful. I'm a very big fan of designing sort of like sonic ecosystems that are just extremely like maximalist in nature and use like tons of different sounds. So like just sort of creating my own little world has been like very, very helpful, and designing concept work for that has been also super helpful. And yeah, I think like in general, like for the arts, like in middle school, I had an art teacher, and her name was Mrs. Crawford. She was great. And she would always say that there are no mistakes in art. And I think that it would be beneficial for like each and every one of us to sort of like take that to heart and have more liberty and like creative expression.
I can't say I'm particularly artistic like Lucia and Colleen, but I think I've found a lot of that doing little things that make me happy are really helpful. And maybe it's something silly like doing a face mask or going and getting myself coffee or hanging out and getting lunch with a friend. But little things add up to really, make me feel better. And also giving myself breaks, just deciding, you know what, like it's been a really tough day. I'm gonna sleep in tomorrow. Um, and I'm very lucky in that I also have larger resources like therapy and medication and things like that to help. But, for the big things like medication and therapy can't help with, I find that the little things are also really great. So,
Also, I've found that advocacy has helped a lot with my with my mental health, I just started, I go around, I work mostly with off-campus Greek life because that is a community that, I mean, homophobia and racism is deeply embedded into the Greek system, and our school unaffiliated from them because of that, didn't want to be associated with that, and really that's just allowed more things to happen without any kind of punishment. And so I did a lot of work with sororities, and now I'm doing work with the fraternities, going in and talking about the F slur and talking about how harmful it is and how it feels to be called that, giving a firsthand experience, and because that word is so casually used in conversation, I hear it quite often within like the fraternity community, and so I'm targeting that, and it's just drastically been made a huge impact on my mental health, just being able to be like, I want to tell you how your words are hurting me. And that makes me feel so powerful. It makes me feel like I'm standing up for myself. And I think that's a huge thing, is not being submissive to what they're doing and what they're calling me and my girlfriend or this community.
I think similarly, I've sort of like channeled like my advocacy work not only into VPE but into like my academics as well. I can totally vouch for the independent major program. I think that like queer people as a whole, like obviously we're inherently like non-conforming, and I think that sort of applying that non-conformity to our academics and designing like an individual like academic plan has been like very helpful for my mental health. Yeah, and sort of like studying violence prevention and like really immersing myself in that has been very helpful as well. And also like the thing with the independent major is that you can sort of like design it to have like to prepare you like for specific careers. So like I've mentioned the Trevor Project so many times. So obviously I want to work for them. Yeah.
What I think is so great about everything you all just mentioned is it was like highlighting all these different parts of each of you beyond your queer identity, right? I feel like a lot of times when we think about like interventions and affirmation, we think like we need to create more like spaces, right? Like more RRCs. I mean, I totally agree. Like the RRC, like, anyway, we could get into all of that, right? But alongside that, I think like the queer story is like dynamic and beautiful, right? And so then when we're talking about like ways to fill our own cup as minority stresses, poking holes in it, and the advocacy work that we do like means that we're constantly pulling in, like pouring into other people's cup, right? The things that we do for self-care, it's so important to acknowledge all the other parts of us too, right? And like that's why oftentimes when we're doing work in therapy or something, it's like, okay, not just finding one person in one group to affirm all the parts of you, because I mean, come on, right? That's a big ask. And sometimes one person or one group can't show up for you because, they're dealing with their own thing at the time, right? It's finding that dynamic approach to finding how to affirm all these different parts of us. And that's truly celebrating queer people, is seeing them as dynamic whole people, right? That's Kyara Personalis.
Yeah, a lot of you touched on a few things that I also like to do, just to like be in my own world essentially. So I like to, like Lucia mentioned, I like to paint. Even though I'm not good at it, I still like to do it because it gives me free reign to paint like whatever I like, whatever I'm feeling at the moment. I like to go on walks because I like to just be with nature and just connect with it and feel its calming presence essentially. I also listen to a ton of music. I know people are very like picky about music, so I like to just listen to music that I like and just like feel the beat and just be with the beat, be in my own little world, and just like doing things that make me feel happy, essentially. Like going back to what Clarice about self-care, like that is very important. Like taking care of yourself should essentially be your number one. Like it can be tricky sometimes, especially being a college student, where you're just like, oh, I gotta get this assignment done. Oh no, a deadline's coming up. Just and I think Grace mentioned just like taking breaks, like give yourself a break. Like it's very important. Like you don't want to burn yourself out. I unfortunately have done that a few times and it sucks. So it's very good to like stop what you're doing and take a step back and just be like, let me take a few moments to like collect myself. Let me take a few moments to stop reading or typing whatever I'm doing. Let me just like sit with myself for a minute and just like collect my thoughts. I think is very important. And if anyone wants to like share any more random things that should be said or anything important that they want to like share before we like wrap up this episode, feel free to do so.
Yeah, one thing is I did it last quarter. The fall quarter. I did a research study on the queer experience in Greek life. And it was anonymous. I don't know who the participants are, but they all identify as bi, and I don't know if we have that representation here, but they all identify as bi, and they reported that every single one of our participants had been called the F slur by a fraternity member. And so that's something that I want to put out there needs to be really targeted. One, lots of biphobia at our school. It's quite disturbing. And then like just having those conversations about why these words are harmful, the D slur, how these words are impacting our community, and also just pure education, because I'm going to go into these fraternities and I'm not going to be blaming. I'm going to be like, I need to educate this because you are all using this in such a casual way and it's so wildly harmful. So I just wanted to put that out there because I think it's very telling of the queer experience here. And my girlfriend, who is bi, has experienced extreme biphobia. And so making sure that is known, that even though we're in California at a very, what I would say a liberal school, there's still so much of this anti-LGBTQ plus things that are going on. And so, yeah, I think it's really important to just put that out there.
Of course, I have some like mental health resources to plug, but before that, speaking of populations that we don't even really talk about within the queer community, is like the ACE spectrum and our students who do identify as being ACE, and how there's really no like a legitimized space for students with like those identities. And just like I always want to just, if that voice isn't in the room, or if it is in the room, reminder, like you can't see it, right? And more of those assumptions, right? We assume a lot of times ideas about like romantic life being part of college or sexual life being part of college, and it's so common in just our jokes and colloquialisms and assumptions that if someone doesn't have those parts of their life, then they're less than in some way. So I just want to plug, like, I think that's a conversation we'll be having more of. But then in terms of resources, right? So CAPS has undergone so many changes in just this past year, and it's always so useful for us to hear like the feedback from you all. And today, you know, like I'm taking it all in and really like bookmarking it in my heart, but then also in my voice for sure. But we do have SEQ, which is Santa Clara Queer, which is an LGBTQ plus affirming and celebratory therapy group on campus. I facilitate that. You can sign up for that through your health portal, so you don't even have to talk to anyone about it, or by reaching out to me. I'm Clarise Ballesteros. I'm one of the therapists in residence. You can also call the Cowell Center front desk. We are expanding, right, our therapists who identify as LGBTQ plus affirming. That's kind of how we're navigating that, right? And like you all mentioned, you can look at the website, right, and see who is self-identifying that way. But in general, all the therapists are required to go through safe space training and to stay up to date on continuing education when like working with queer identifying clients. And so we also have, for students who live on campus, we now have walk-ins where you can sign up through your portal same day and see someone for like a non-crisis situation. And that's how, we see a lot of students kind of getting in the pipeline to see a therapist faster. And then of course, we always have walk-in crisis appointments during business hours. That's applicable to like every human being. And then CAPS 24/7 operates the 24/7 hotline. And all the information is on the Cowell Center website. There's posters, hopefully in every residence hall on campus, in the elevators, the hallways, etc. If you see any spaces lacking that information, please let me know, and I will get to tape in more posters and flyers up. So yeah, but thank you so much for providing this space today, right? Just to like meet in community and have this conversation. It's life affirming to me, and I hope it could be that for others as well.
Yes, thank you all for sharing and being here today. I really appreciate it. This has been very important to me, especially with it being like Mental Health Awareness Month. I just thought this was very important to talk about and get out. Even though we were only here for a couple of minutes, I still like the conversation doesn't have to stop here. Like it can keep going in various forms, and like students as well, like feel free to like bring this conversation up wherever you see fit. Like addressing like your concerns as well is very important. And even like coming to us with it, we can better help like show you and tell you how to like be advocates for it, and we can help you like fight for whatever you think the community here on campus needs more of, because I'm sure there are some things that are still being missed, but we are here to help in any way we can. Again, thank you all for joining me today. I really did appreciate it. And I hope you all listening, I hope you got something out of this. I hope you enjoyed the conversation we had here today. And that has been another episode of Word of the Street. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
so much for having us.
Thank you.